People like you don't get celebrated. You serve, others shine. But tonight, the spotlight is hers alone, blazing across a woman who rebuilt her life from every piece they tried to break. And the man who threw those words at her is approaching with a confession that might finally expose what kind of man he truly is. Stay with us, because the truth you're about to witness will flip everything upside down. The woman they underestimated is the one the world now rises for. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever rewritten your own story? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with Love, and ring that notification bell for more heartwarming stories that celebrate strength. Soft morning light slid across the marble floors of the Clark estate, turning the world into a quiet cathedral of wealth. Inside it moved a single figure who did not belong to its shine. Whitney Thompson stepped through the echoing halls with a calm grace that came from years of learning how to be invisible. Her hands worked with quiet precision, gathering glasses left from the night before, straightening chairs no one thanked her for fixing, restoring beauty she would never be invited to enjoy. She was breathtaking in a way the mansion was not meant to hold. Deep brown skin catching pale light and turning it warm. Eyes carrying stories too heavy to set down, shoulders pulled back with the kind of strength built from the places she had survived. There was a softness about her, but it was not fragility. It was the softness of someone who had endured without losing her soul. In the distance came the soft thud of measured footsteps. Melvin Clark moved through the estate like a man born to glide. Tall and poised, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it had been tailored with him in mind. His presence filled the room long before he spoke. People always noticed him. They leaned in. They adjusted themselves. They wanted to be close to the quiet force he carried with him. Everyone except Whitney. She simply stepped aside and kept working. Melvin passed her the way people pass air. His eyes skimmed over her without landing. He was used to luxury, to beauty shaped by designers and lit by chandeliers. He saw chandeliers. He saw deals. He saw the world that mirrored his own importance. But he did not see the woman on her knees polishing his floors with a kind of dignity richer than anything he owned. Whitney did not flinch. She had learned long ago that some people look right through you not because you are small, but because their world has no space for anything real. Outside the windows, the estate gardens glowed like something out of a magazine. Inside, Whitney moved past glittering sculptures and curated art pieces that cost more than her yearly salary. She knew every inch of this place. The creak in the west corridor, the cold draft near the grand staircase, the secret fingerprints of the Clark family scattered across glass tables after late nights and celebrations she served but never joined. Melvin walked into the dining room where staff had set out delicate pastries for an upcoming meeting. Whitney remained in the corner, organizing linens with the kind of quiet skill that made rooms seem to fix themselves. Melvin stood just a few feet from her, scrolling through messages on his phone. The sun hit him just right, outlining his profile like a magazine cover. The powerful jawline, the silver watch, the posture of a man who never had to worry if he belonged. Whitney felt the weight of his presence, but not the warmth of it. He did not look up, not even once. Some stories begin with a spark. Theirs began with a silence so sharp it carved a distance between two people who breathed the same air, yet lived in different worlds. Whitney gathered the last linen and straightened. For a moment, her eyes rested on him. Not longing, not recognition. Only a quiet question that had lived inside her for years. How can someone stand so close and still never see you? Melvin turned away, unaware that this small moment, this silent dismissal, was the beginning of something he would spend a lifetime trying to understand. And in that heavy stillness, something inside Whitney shifted. A seed planted in the quiet soil of her heart, waiting for the day it would rise. The night shimmered with gold and glass as the Clark estate transformed into a cathedral of wealth. Soft music floated through the air like perfume. Diamonds glowed against skin. Laughter rose in elegant waves. The charity gala was meant to celebrate generosity, yet the room pulsed with something colder. Every guest seemed carved from privilege, glittering in their confidence, gliding across the marble tiles as if the world itself bent to their steps. Whitney moved quietly among them. Her black uniform blended into the shadows, but there was no hiding the quiet radiance she carried. Her skin seemed to glow against the pale lights, her presence a soft contrast to the sharp edges of the elite. She carried trays of champagne, refreshed linens, and gathered empty glasses with practiced grace. She stayed steady, even as voices around her sharpened with entitlement. Melvin Clark stood near the entrance, surrounded by donors and socialites hanging on his every word. He looked polished, handsome, untouchable. Every so often his eyes swept the room, not out of curiosity but out of habit, ensuring the world remained aligned with his expectations. When Whitney passed behind him, he barely turned. She was a part of the furniture in his mind, useful but unseen. The moment that changed everything arrived without warning. A woman in a glittering silver gown raised a hand lazily as Whitney approached with a tray of drinks. The guest had the kind of beauty that carried a price tag, the kind that expected admiration simply by existing. Whitney offered her a glass with the same quiet professionalism she offered everyone else. The woman frowned, as if the air around Whitney offended her. She reached out, took a glass, sipped it, then grimaced. In one careless motion, she flicked her wrist and spilled the rest across Whitney's apron. A cold cascade of liquid hit Whitney's skin, soaking the fabric. The woman laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. Others joined in, enjoying the spectacle. Whitney felt heat rush up her neck, not from shame but from something deeper, older, more powerful. A quiet storm rising inside her. She whispered an apology, even though she had done nothing wrong. She reached to steady the tray, to wipe the stain, to continue the night, as if this humiliation were a normal part of her world. But then she heard it. The guest's voice floated through the room. "Next time, keep your hands steady. People like you should be grateful to serve. People like you." Whitney froze, still holding the tray. Every sound around her grew louder, every color brighter, every heartbeat heavier. Across the room, Melvin Clark stood with a perfect view of the scene. His expression barely shifted. He did not step forward. He did not correct the woman. He did not protect Whitney from the sting of those cutting words. He simply watched, and his silence hit harder than the drink that soaked her. For the first time in her life, Whitney felt something break. Not her dignity. That remained intact, standing quietly in her eyes. What snapped was the invisible line she had spent years pretending did not exist. A line that told her to accept disrespect so long as it came wrapped in money or power. A line she realized she had crossed every day just to survive. Tonight, that line dissolved. Whitney set the tray down on a nearby table with calm hands. She straightened her spine and lifted her gaze, and in that moment, surrounded by fragile wealth and fragile egos, she felt the first breath of her own power. The moment was small, but it was the beginning. The night that was meant to celebrate generosity instead revealed a truth. She could no longer remain invisible. She could no longer swallow her pride for comfort. She could no longer shrink herself to fit inside the blindness of others. In the quiet aftermath of her humiliation, Whitney walked away from the crowd with steady steps, unaware that every one of them was leading her toward the rise the world would one day witness. The sun rose slowly over the Clark estate, spilling soft light across the driveway and creeping through tall windows, as if the day itself wanted to whisper something different. A hush filled the halls, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Whitney Thompson stepped into that silence with a calmness that felt new, almost unfamiliar, yet deeply earned. Her uniform was crisp, her step steady, but something in her was no longer bending under the weight of what happened the night before. The stain on her apron had been washed away, yet the memory of it lived beneath her skin. Not as shame, not anymore, but as fuel. At the long console table near the front entrance, Whitney paused. She placed a small folded note on the polished wood. It looked fragile against the expensive decor, yet it held more truth than anything that mansion had ever displayed. I deserve better. No flourish, no explanation, no apology, just a quietly spoken declaration of worth. She had whispered it to herself all night, until it stopped sounding like rebellion and began sounding like fact. Whitney looked around once more. At the marble floors she had polished until her knees ached. At the chandeliers she dusted while balancing on old ladders. At the doors she held open for people who never learned her name. None of it belonged to her. None of it was meant for her. None of it had ever seen her. She exhaled. Then she walked out. The cold morning air met her face like a blessing. With each step down the front stairs, she left behind not just a job, but a version of herself she had kept small for too long. Outside the gates, the city moved in soft rhythms, unaware that a woman was choosing herself for the first time in a long time. Her life fit into a single tote bag slung over her shoulder. 3 changes of clothes, a well-worn journal filled with ideas, a small envelope holding the modest savings she had scraped together over the years. It was not much, but it was hers. Whitney walked to the bus stop with the sun warming her back. She sat down on the cold metal bench and opened her journal. The words on the first page stared back at her, written years ago when she still allowed herself to dream. A home care agency that restores dignity. She had written it at a time when she believed she could build something beautiful. Then life happened. Bills happened. Exhaustion happened. And slowly she forgot the sound of her own ambition. Until now. As the bus rumbled toward the heart of the city, Whitney searched on her phone for opportunities, resources, anything that could turn possibility into reality. That was when she found it. A grant program for Black women entrepreneurs. A chance to build something with support. A chance to rewrite her future. She applied right there on the bus, fingers trembling not with fear, but with hunger. She filled out the questions carefully, honestly. What drives you? What is your vision? What impact do you want to create? When she reached the final question, she paused. Who are you doing this for? Whitney closed her eyes. Faces flashed in her mind. The women she worked beside. The ones exhausted from serving families that treated them like background noise. The ones who dreamt of more but settled for less because the world had taught them that survival was all they deserved. She wrote one sentence. For every woman who has ever been unseen. The bus turned a corner and sunlight poured across her face like a quiet affirmation. She hit submit. The spark that had ignited during the gala now burned with purpose. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if the grant would be approved or if her dream would survive its first breath. But she knew this. She had walked out of the Clark estate a maid. She stepped off the bus a woman becoming. The first office was barely more than a closet with a window, tucked between a dry cleaner and a discount shoe store. The walls were thin. The heater rattled. The paint peeled in the corners like tired petals. But to Whitney, it was a beginning, a sacred little room where she could breathe without shrinking, where her dream had space to stand upright. On the first day, she brought in a single desk she found on a curb, wiped it down, and placed her journal beside a cheap lamp. She printed a sign for the door in bold letters, Thompson Luxury Home Care. She stared at it for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle into her bones. This was hers. Built not from inheritance or luck, but from courage scraped together one painful moment at a time. Work came slowly at first. One client, then another, each one drawn in by the calm certainty in Whitney's voice, the way she listened as if every detail mattered, the way she carried herself with quiet assurance. She offered more than cleaning or organization. She offered dignity. She restored order like an artist restoring a painting, unveiling beauty that had been buried under chaos and neglect. Her leadership was gentle yet commanding. She hired women who reminded her of herself, women who had worked in silence for years, women who knew how to carry the weight of other people's lives without complaint. Whitney trained them not to serve like shadows, but to walk into homes as professionals with pride in their craft. She taught them the language of boundaries, the art of saying no, the power of holding their heads high. Clients felt the difference immediately. They recommended her to friends, then those friends recommended her again. Soon, she had a waiting list longer than her office window was wide. Her tiny workspace filled with laughter, paperwork, and the steady hum of purpose. One day, a journalist asked to interview her for a small local magazine. Whitney agreed, unsure of what anyone would want to write about her. The photographer insisted on taking a picture outside her office. Whitney stood in front of the door with her shoulders back, wearing a simple blouse and the confidence she had earned. The wind caught her curls. The morning sun kissed her cheek. She looked like a woman who had spent years walking through storms and had finally stepped into her own sky. The photo was posted online that afternoon. By nightfall, it was everywhere. People shared it not for the story, but for the feeling it carried. A black woman standing proudly in front of something she built with her own hands. A look in her eyes that said, "I am not done." A presence so warm and strong it made strangers straighten their own backs. Articles followed, interviews multiplied, grant programs reached out. A business podcast called her a rising visionary. A lifestyle magazine named her one of the brightest new forces in luxury home care. Inside the Clark estate, Melvin Clark scrolled past her photo on his feed and froze. The face he had once walked by without a second glance now commanded 1,000. Her beauty had not changed. Her dignity had not changed. What changed was the lens through which the world saw her. Melvin lifted the phone closer. The light traced the curves of her face, the determination in her gaze, the quiet fire that lived beneath her skin. And for the first time in his life, he felt the sharp truth he had ignored for so long. She had been extraordinary all along. He had simply never looked. Melvin Clark first noticed her face in a quiet moment between meetings. He was flipping through a business magazine on his private jet, reading without really reading, drifting through pages filled with people who lived lives that mirrored his own. Then he saw her, Whitney Thompson, standing in front of a tiny office with sunlight wrapped around her like a blessing, her curls free, her posture strong, her eyes steady with a kind of earned power he had never noticed when she moved silently through his halls. He stared at the picture longer than he meant to. The article called her a rising force, a visionary, a woman redefining the luxury home care industry with integrity and heart. The words unsettled him, not because she did not deserve them, but because he had once stood inches from her and failed to see any of it. The magazine fell onto the leather seat beside him, but her image stayed with him. Days later, she appeared again. A news segment, a podcast clip circulating online, a business profile praising her leadership. Her name echoed across spaces she had never been welcomed into before. and suddenly the world was paying attention to a woman he had overlooked every morning. Intrigue came first, a curiosity that tugged at him in quiet moments. He searched her interviews, convinced it was only to understand her business model. But every time he heard her voice, calm and steady, something inside him tightened. She spoke with clarity, with compassion, with a strength she carried so quietly back when she worked under his roof. He remembered passing her in the hallway without a glance. He remembered the gala, the spilled champagne, the laughter at her expense. He remembered doing nothing. Intrigue dissolved into embarrassment. Because how could a man raised in rooms filled with brilliance fail to recognize real brilliance standing right beside him? He prided himself on his discernment, his instincts, his ability to read people in seconds. Yet he had looked at Whitney Thompson and seen only the uniform she wore. Embarrassment deepened into shame. It hit him late at night, when the world quieted enough for memory to speak. He replayed scene after scene, the times she reached to hold open doors without being thanked, the mornings she wiped down tables he cluttered with his rushed breakfasts, the moments her eyes crossed his path, offering a hint of humanity he had never bothered to return. Now, whenever he saw her on a screen, he did not see the maid he had treated like a reflection on glass. He saw the woman he never deserved to know, a woman who carried storms and sunlight in equal measure, a woman who had risen not because of kindness from others, but in spite of their indifference. Her success haunted him, not out of resentment, not out of jealousy, but out of the piercing awareness that he had shared space with someone extraordinary and behaved like a man too small to recognize it. One evening he sat alone in his penthouse, city lights spilling into the room like fragments of a life built on noise instead of meaning. Whitney appeared again on his feed in a short video clip, speaking at a conference about dignity in labor. She wore a deep blue dress that made her eyes seem brighter than he remembered. She spoke of worth, of identity, of the unseen hands that hold up the world. And something inside Melvin broke open, because now he saw her clearly, and that clarity carried the weight of every moment he had dismissed her humanity. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen painting her face across his own regret. A realization settled over him like a confession. He had spent his life surrounded by beauty, yet the most beautiful thing he ever encountered was the one he never took the time to see. Chaos did not arrive at Melvin Clark's company like a storm. It arrived like a slow leak, one ignored complaint at a time. A receptionist speaking out about cruel supervisors, a janitor describing unsafe conditions, a housekeeper recalling the way managers spoke to her as if her dignity were optional. One story became 3, 3 became 10. Then the media caught the scent, and the quiet leak burst open into a flood that drowned every ounce of control Melvin thought he had. Headlines accused his empire of mistreating the very people who held it together. Investors called him at all hours. The board demanded explanations. The public wanted accountability. The air in his office grew heavy with panic, whispers, and fear. His flawless reputation, once polished like marble, cracked under the weight of truth. Every expert he consulted gave the same answer. You need someone who understands people, someone who can rebuild trust from the ground up, someone with integrity, someone like Whitney Thompson. Her name echoed in his conference room like a reckoning. Melvin felt the sting of it, not because she was unqualified, but because she was exactly what he no longer was. A symbol of dignity, a testament to what compassion and structure could build. She represented everything he had overlooked in his own halls, everything he had ignored in her. His team drafted a formal request for a consultation, polished, professional, deferential. When Whitney received the email, she read it twice, not in disbelief, but in a quiet stillness that came from seeing fate circle back on itself. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no bitterness, only a slow breath as she considered the gravity of what this meant. She remembered the night of the gala, the cold spill of champagne, the sound of laughter slicing through her pride. She remembered walking out of the mansion the next morning, unsure of her future but certain of her worth. Now, she was being called in to save the same world that once erased her. The meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Whitney arrived early, her steps measured, her presence serene. Her hair framed her face in soft waves. Her tailored suit whispered strength with every movement. She carried no apology in her posture, only truth. Employees watched as she walked through the lobby. Some recognized her from the articles. Others simply felt the shift in the air when she passed by. Whitney moved with the quiet authority of someone who knew she belonged in every room she entered. The conference room door opened. Melvin stood inside, away from the table, as if unsure where he had the right to stand. The last time he saw her up close, she was polishing his floors. Today, she was the woman whose expertise might save his empire. Whitney stepped across the threshold, and the world seemed to pause. Her eyes met his, not with anger, not with warmth, but with a calm she had earned drop by drop through every hard year of her life. Melvin felt something tighten in his chest, not from attraction, but from the weight of his own blindness finally landing where it belonged. She took the seat at the head of the table, the position of authority, the place she should have occupied all along. Melvin watched her unfold her notes, her movements precise and assured. She did not shrink. She did not hesitate. She did not lower her gaze. The woman he once failed to see now commanded the room like a rising tide. As she began to speak, her voice steady and clear, the board leaned in. Melvin listened with a reverence he did not fully understand. Whitney outlined standards, boundaries, protections, reforms. Her words carried dignity like a blade carved from truth. In that room, surrounded by power, Whitney finally stood not as someone overlooked, but as someone indispensable. And Melvin realized that sometimes the universe brings people back into your life not for redemption, but for correction. She was here not to return to his world. She was here to rebuild it. The meeting ended hours later, leaving the boardroom buzzing with whispered admiration and the uneasy realization that a new standard had entered the building. Whitney gathered her papers with steady hands, offering polite nods to those who thanked her for her insight. She moved with the ease of someone who had learned long ago not to be impressed by power, only by character. Melvin lingered near the window, pretending to study the skyline while stealing glances at her reflection in the glass. It was impossible to hide the truth from himself any longer. He saw her, truly saw her. Not as the woman who once blended into the background of his estate, but as someone whose presence reshaped the air around her. She was beautiful in a way money had no language for. Her beauty was rooted in survival, in strength, in a calm that came from rebuilding herself from the inside out. Her voice earlier had carried the weight of lived experience. Her posture had spoken of boundaries that no one could cross. She seemed unshakable, a force wrapped in grace. She reached for her bag when she noticed him watching. Their eyes met, and something broke quietly inside him. A truth he had ignored for far too long rose up like a tide he could no longer outrun. He stepped forward, the words tangled in his throat. Whitney paused, offering him the courtesy of her attention, but not the softness he had once expected from her. "I need to say something," Melvin began, his voice unsteady. The air in the room thinned. His confidence, so polished in boardrooms and negotiations, deserted him. He felt stripped bare under the weight of her steady gaze. "I was wrong," he said, the words dragging themselves out like a confession carved from regret. "I treated you like you were invisible. I let someone humiliate you. I stood there and did nothing. and I have spent every day since seeing the truth I should have seen back then." Whitney said nothing. She did not try to ease his discomfort. She did not step in to soften the edges of his shame. She let silence settle between them, thick and uncomfortable, forcing him to sit in the consequences of his own blindness. Melvin swallowed hard. "I did not see you. That is the truth. I did not see your strength, your intelligence, your worth. I saw your uniform instead of the woman wearing it, and I cannot explain how much that haunts me now." Whitney's expression remained calm, almost serene. There was no anger, no relief, no forgiveness waiting in her eyes. Only the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that her value did not depend on the acknowledgement of others. He felt himself unraveling under her silence, his chest tightening in a way he was not prepared for. It was the most painful moment of his privileged life, because for the first time he was forced to confront who he had been when she needed humanity the most. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but unyielding. "I did not need your apology then, and I do not need it now. I needed respect. I needed someone to see my humanity. I survived without your understanding. I rose without your help." Her words were not cruel. They were simply true. Melvin lowered his head, absorbing the blow that was not meant to wound, but to awaken. Whitney stepped past him, the faint scent of jasmine trailing behind her like a reminder of everything he had missed. She left the conference room without looking back, walking into the world she had built from her own strength. And Melvin remained standing in the echo of his own regret, realizing that some apologies do not heal wounds. Some only reveal them. The contract arrived on Whitney's desk 3 days after their meeting, thick as a law textbook and filled with the kind of corporate language meant to intimidate. She read every line with a calm, steady focus. She circled sections, drew arrows, made notes in the margins. By the time she reached the final page, she understood something with absolute clarity. She would help them, but only on her terms. The next morning, she returned to the company headquarters, carrying her marked-up contract with the same confidence she once carried cleaning supplies through Melvin's estate. The lobby employees straightened when she passed, not out of fear, but out of respect. They had seen the articles. They had heard the whispers. Whitney Thompson was a woman who fought for people like them. Inside the boardroom, Melvin sat waiting. The others filled the long table with tight smiles and restless hands. Whitney placed the contract in front of her and opened it slowly. "I will not sign this," she said. A ripple of panic broke across the table. Melvin tensed, but she raised a hand, stopping him before he could speak. "I will not sign this," she repeated, "because it protects the wrong people." She slid forward a second document. Her version, leaner, sharper, honest. "In my contract," she said, "staff members receive immediate access to anonymous reporting channels. Supervisors must undergo mandatory leadership training. The company funds emergency assistance for workers facing hardship. And you implement a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect at any level." The board shifted uncomfortably. One man cleared his throat and said that her terms were extreme. Whitney looked at him with a calm that made his voice wither. "Extreme is what your employees have lived through. This is justice." Melvin watched her the entire time, not as a man evaluating a business proposal, but as someone witnessing a force reshaping everything he thought he understood. She spoke with a clarity that demanded attention, correcting the powerful without flinching. She continued, "There will be quarterly reviews conducted independently, full transparency, and none of this moves forward unless your staff leads the decision-making. They tell us what needs to change. We listen." Melvin nodded, unable to hide the admiration in his eyes. What she was offering was not a patch. It was transformation, and it came with boundaries carved from steel. One board member objected, saying these measures could cost millions. Whitney met his concern with quiet fire. You lost more than millions when you lost their trust. You are rebuilding something that was broken long before this scandal broke the headlines. You can pay the price now or pay something far more costly later. The room fell silent. Melvin exhaled, his voice low. We will do it. Everything you ask for. Whitney looked at him, studying him as if measuring whether he understood the weight of his own words. She did not soften. She did not smile. She did not bend. Accountability is not a promise, she said. It is a practice. And if I see even a hint of your company slipping back into old habits, I walk away. My name does not sit beside anything that harms the people I stand for. Melvin felt something shift deep inside him. Not fear of losing her, fear of failing her. It struck him that the woman he once dismissed now held him to a standard he had never held himself to, and he found himself wanting to rise to it. As the board members signed the revised contract, Whitney stood still, unshaken, her presence shaping the room more than any policy could. Melvin watched with a quiet ache, finally understanding the truth that had lived between them from the start. She was never beneath him. She was always beyond him. And now, for the first time in his life, he was learning what it meant to follow. Whitney's reforms did not arrive as grand gestures. They arrived as small mercies that multiplied, a respectful tone, a protected boundary, a safer workplace, a voice finally heard. And one by one, the people who had once walked through the company halls with lowered eyes began to lift their heads. A quiet revolution was unfolding. Supervisors who had barked orders now listened before they spoke. Managers who once hid behind titles now learned the weight of accountability. The break rooms, once filled with weary silence, now hummed with soft laughter and the delicate bloom of trust returning. Whitney moved through those halls with the same gentle grace she always carried, but now people stepped aside not to make her invisible but to honor her leadership. Word spread quickly. A company once known for power without compassion was transforming, and reporters wanted to understand how. Cameras followed Whitney from meeting rooms to staff lounges to training workshops. She spoke not with theatrics, but with truth, her voice steady as she described the realities of invisible labor. Work done in silence is still sacred, she told them. Dignity does not need applause to be real, but it does need protection. Someone recorded that speech with a trembling hand, standing in the back of a crowded room. The video made its way to the internet, raw and unedited, capturing every breath of Whitney's conviction. Within hours, it had spread across social platforms like a tide no one could hold back. People watched her and saw themselves. Women who had spent years cleaning offices before dawn. Men who held jobs that society dismissed as unskilled. Children of domestic workers who grew up hearing stories of disrespect swallowed for the sake of survival. They shared her words with pride, with tears, with gratitude. She was not just speaking for them. She was speaking as one of them. News anchors praised her wisdom. Business analysts called her leadership revolutionary. Activists called her necessary. And everywhere she looked, Whitney saw a world awakening to a truth she had carried alone for too many years. Through all of it, Melvin watched from behind the camera lights, sometimes from the back of the room, sometimes from a quiet corner where no one noticed him. He listened to her speak with a reverence he had never felt for any CEO or industry leader. He noticed the way she held herself with calm power, how she made every person in the room feel seen. She did not shine because his company asked her to. She did not shine because he finally acknowledged her worth. She shone because she chose herself long before anyone else thought to. That truth humbled him in ways nothing else ever had. During a live interview, Whitney stood in front of a wall of windows, city lights sparkling like stars behind her. She spoke about choosing honor over comfort, truth over silence, purpose over fear. The interviewer asked how she found the strength to rise after being overlooked for so long. Whitney smiled, slow and knowing. When a world refuses to see you, you learn to see yourself. And when you finally do, there is no going back to smallness. Melvin felt those words settle into the hollow spaces inside him, reshaping something he did not yet know how to name. He realized that the woman he once dismissed had become a beacon for thousands, not because she was connected to him, but because she was connected to her own truth, and no man alive could take credit for that brilliance. Whitney Thompson had become a lighthouse. All he could do now was stand in the distance, humbled by the glow. The night air was thick with anticipation as the auditorium buzzed with soft voices and camera lights. A global award ceremony was underway, honoring leaders who had reshaped industries with courage and humanity. Whitney Thompson's name was printed in gold on the program, a quiet testament to the journey she carved with her own hands. Backstage, she stood alone for a moment, letting the hush settle around her. Her reflection stared back from a nearby mirror, not the woman who once polished marble floors in silence. Not the woman who learned to swallow disrespect to keep a job. She saw a leader, a protector, a force born from truth rather than acceptance. Her breath steadied. Across the room, Melvin Clark approached, stopping a respectful distance away. He looked different now, softer around the edges, less like a man trying to control the world, and more like one finally learning to understand it. "Whitney," he began, his voice almost fragile. She turned toward him, folding her hands in front of her. There was no bitterness in her gaze, but no softness either, only clarity. "I wanted to speak to you before you go on that stage," he said, "not to revisit the past, not to ask you for anything, just to say something I should have said long ago." She waited, still as water before a storm. "I do not want to stake a claim in your success. I do not want people to attach my name to your rise. I do not want to pretend that I helped shape the brilliance you built on your own. I just want to do better, to be better, not for redemption, but because you showed me what humanity looks like when it refuses to break." His voice trembled slightly. "I cannot undo the harm I caused you, but I can make sure I never harm anyone in that way again." Whitney inhaled slowly, letting his confession settle between them like dust catching the light. "Thank you," she said quietly, and she meant it. But gratitude did not erase truth. She stepped closer, her posture grounded in the strength she had earned. "You can walk beside me," she said, "but you will never stand over me again. That part of the story is finished." He nodded, relief and acceptance softening his features. He did not ask for more. He did not attempt to rewrite the boundaries she placed between them. He simply bowed his head slightly, honoring her position, her journey, her power. The stage manager called for her. Whitney turned and walked toward the lights. Each step carried echoes of the path behind her. The first office she rented with trembling hands, the staff who trusted her, the voices she lifted, the dignity she restored, the boundaries she built. She had earned every inch of this moment. When she stepped into the brilliance of the stage lights, the audience rose in a wave of applause. Cameras flashed like distant stars. Her name echoed through the auditorium, wrapped in awe and admiration. Melvin watched from the far edge of the room, standing behind the final row of seats. He did not push forward. He did not make himself part of her spotlight. He simply stood there, one man among many, witnessing the rise of a woman he once failed to see. Whitney lifted the award in her hands, her eyes shining, not with pride, but with purpose. She had not risen because the world finally saw her. She rose because she finally saw herself. And in that moment, with the world watching and her story no longer whispered but declared, Whitney Thompson became something undeniable. Not the billionaire's maid, not the woman who survived, but a force of nature who chose her own liberation and inspired millions to choose theirs. The applause swelled like a heartbeat, and Whitney stood tall, her story shining across the world. Before you go, remember this. Stories like hers don't just unfold, they ignite. Someone in your world is standing on the edge of their own turning point, waiting for a sign that their rise is coming. Share this video and be the spark that pushes their story toward the light. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.